The order line rang at the second hour of the deep shift, and a vendor Tosk, who had been counting gasket rings behind a locked door for 30 years and had never once heard that console make a sound after closing, stood very still among his shelves and let it ring twice more before he picked it up. A voice was already talking when the handset touched his ear. It was young, female, send by the vowels, and it was saying coordinates. Say again, drift vector 914 through the Marin Deep corridor, 1,083 souls aboard, drive is dead, boats are damaged, we require immediate. The voice stopped. Tosk had not said anything. He had only breathed. Vigil station, the voice said, slower now, the way a person speaks when they are deciding whether to be afraid of a new thing, on top of all the old things. Vigil station, confirm receipt. Tosk looked at the console. It was a counter unit, gray, older than his apprenticeship, and its little glass title strip read long shelf provisions, orders, because that was what it was for. Dock crews keyed it to ask whether he had bearing grease in the 4-weight or only the 6. Galley cooks keyed it about flour. Nobody had ever keyed it about souls. This is a shop, Tosk said. The silence that came back was its own kind of transmission. He could hear behind it a low, irregular knocking, and a sound like wind where no wind should be, and very faintly a great many voices in a space built to echo. Say again, the voice said. This is a shop, Tosk said. Long shelf provisions, Celis Ring Arcade dockside. You have keyed a shop's order line. I sell cable and lamp oil and gasket rings. I think you have the wrong number. He should have hung up then. He would think about that moment for the rest of his life. The half-second when his thumb actually found the cradle switch and rested on it, the way you rest a thumb on a thing you are about to press. It would have been correct. It would have been, by every regulation of the Celis Ring Commerce Code, the proper action. Misdialed calls are to be terminated promptly so that the line remains free for legitimate trade. His thumb stayed on the switch. It did not press. On the other end of the line, 1,083 people made the sound that a crowd makes when a deck shifts under it, and the young voice said, with a steadiness that was costing it everything it had, I pressed the vigil stud. This is the vigil line. The plate says the vigil always answers. What plate? Tosk said. What stud? Start at the front. Her name was Rin Setha, signals apprentice, third watch, aboard the Pilgrim ferry San Karu, 11 days out from the Sen Shrine Moon at Olvas with a congregation aboard for the autumn observance. 9 hours ago, the Karu had crossed a micrometeoroid swarm that the charts had placed 40,000 kilometers further sunward. The swarm had opened the drive room, killed the mains, and shaved the antenna farm off the dorsal spine the way a blade shaves stubble. The shipmaster was unconscious in the infirmary with a head wound. The second mate had the con. The boats, 11 of them, rated for 260 seats all told, which had been a scandal nobody had cared about while the ship was healthy, had taken splinter. Damage, 6 would not unlatch from their cradles at all. And the San Karu, drives dead, was falling along a long, shallow ellipse into the flare fan of a protostar the charts called Mausch's Ember, which threw sheets of charged murder off its face on a rhythm the almanac knew well. The next sheet would cross the Karu's path in roughly 27 hours. The hull was a ferry's hull. It would not argue with a flare. It would simply stop being a hull. All of that Rinsetha told him in under 2 minutes, in the clipped order of a person who had rehearsed it into a dead microphone for hours, waiting for the set to warm. And then she told him about the stud. Every Sen hull above a certain age carried one. It was the law once, old law, hull law, the kind of law that got riveted rather than written. A brass plate on the bridge, and under the plate a single contact stud behind glass, hardwired through the ship's bones to a heritage point cast set in the comm locker, a transmitter so old and so simple that nothing soft could kill it. No directory, no address book. One address, cut physically into a cam, the way music was once cut into cylinders. The address of the ferryman's vigil, the rescue guild of the Sen shipping clans. The men and women who had pulled hulls off shoals for 6 centuries and answered every call regardless of flag, fee, or feud. The plate above the stud said what every Sen child had once been able to recite. When all else fails, break the glass. The vigil always answers. The vigil was dissolved, Tosk said. He said it gently because there was no way to say it that was not cruel. 81 years ago, the Navy absorbed the rescue charter. There is no vigil, signals apprentice. There hasn't been one since before either of us was born. I know that, Rinsetha said. The mains are dead, the farm is gone. The software address is burned with the directory core. The stud is a wire and a cam and a battery the size of a coffin, and it is the only transmitter on this ship that still makes a carrier. So I broke the glass. Her voice did not waver, and somehow that was worse. The cam points where it points. I can't aim it anywhere else. Whoever the registry gave the vigil's address to, that's who I can reach. That's the whole list. You're the whole list, shopkeeper. Tosk sat down on his stool slowly, the way a man sits when the floor has just been redefined, because he knew he had known since the second ring, somewhere under thought, exactly how the vigil's address had become a shop's order line. He had been there. 23 years ago, at the Sector Comms Registry's lapsed address auction, his late business partner Sami had raised one hand for Lot 41, a short-form hail address, 5 tones, dirt cheap, abandoned by some defunct fraternal organization, because short addresses were easy for customers to remember and easier for half-drunk dock riggers to key correctly at the end of a shift. They had laughed about it over supper. 5 low notes, Samhe had said. People will think they're calling somebody important. A registry clerk somewhere had retired a sacred thing into a stationary drawer, and a shopkeeper had bought it for the price of a good winter coat, and for 23 years it had carried orders for flour and 4-weight grease. And tonight a ship was dying on it. How many working sets do you have besides that one, he asked. None, I told you. Receivers? The point cast set hears the trunk return on the same path it casts. That's all. We're a hole in the sky, Vigil Station. We can hear you and nothing else in the universe. You can hear us and choose not to. A pause, then quieter, the first crack showing, please don't choose not to. I am not choosing anything, Tosk said. I am a grocer with a comm console. Stay on the line. Do not put the handset down. I am going to get you to people whose job this is, and then they will take over, and you will tell this story at your guild dinner for the rest of your life. Stay on the line. He set the handset on the counter, face up, like a small live animal, and pulled the secondary unit across. The shop kept 2 lines, because Samhe had believed in redundancy the way other people believed in gods, and keyed the Celis Ring watch desk, the Habitat's own emergency room, 4 decks up and a world away. The watch desk answered on the first tone, which he would later count as the last thing that night that worked the way it was supposed to. Celis Watch, Warden of Record Ulm. Warden, this is Tosk, Long Shelf Provisions, Arcade Dockside. I have a live distress call on my order line. Pilgrim Ferry Sayankaru, 1083 aboard, drives dead, falling into the flare fan at Mausch's Ember, 27 hours to crossing. They can only transmit to my number. I need you to take this. There was a pause of exactly the wrong texture. He heard keys. He heard the warden breathe in through her teeth. Marin Deep Corridor, Olme said. That's not ours, Tosk. That's 9 sectors anti-spinward. Celis Ring's emergency charter covers the ring, the yards, and the approach cone. I have 2 rescue cutters, and neither of them is rated for 1/10 of that transit. I physically cannot send you anything that arrives before the far side of Never. Then relay it. Hand it up the chain. Someone owns that corridor. The Sen Navy owns that corridor. Keys again, faster. I'm opening a relay packet now. Tosk, listen to me. I will log it. I will forward it. I will flag it crimson. And I am telling you as a friend what happens next, because I have done this dance. The Navy's rescue queue takes verified beacon traffic. A beacon is a coded instrument. It self-authenticates. What you have is a voice on a grocery line. The queue clerks are not cruel. They are drowned. They get 900 hoaxes a season, and the filter that keeps them alive is the rule that says no beacon, no launch, verify first. They will open a verification file on the Sayankaru. They will query her owners, her flag registry, her last port. That takes what it takes. How long does it take? Honestly, days. They have 27 hours, then make the beacon talk. The beacon is vapor, Ulma. The whole farm is vapor. The only transmitter that ship has left is a museum piece nailed to my shop. He heard her stop typing. When she spoke again, the wardenship had gone out of her voice, and what was left was just a tired Hadri woman in the middle of the night. Then I will forward the packet, and I will make every noise I am entitled to make, and a few I'm not, she said. And you should understand that the system you and I are standing in was not built for this call. Oh. It was built for every other call. I'm sorry. Keep your line open. I'll come back to you. The line clicked. Tosk looked at the first handset lying face up on the counter, hissing softly with the carrier of a dying ship. He picked it up. Vigil Station, Rinsetha said instantly. Still there? Still here. Your call is moving up the proper chain. How fast does the proper chain move? He was a shopkeeper. He had spent 30 years not lying to customers about delivery dates, because a lie buys you one quiet evening and costs you the rest of your name. Slower than you, he said. They'll want verification before they launch, beacon-coded, which you cannot send. The knocking sound came again down the line, and the wind that should not be there, and underneath it the long murmur of the congregation. And he heard her cover the microphone and speak to someone, and come back. Second mate asked me to tell you our position clean, one more time, so somebody besides us has it. She read it. He wrote it on the back of an invoice for lamp oil, in the careful block glyphs he used for orders he could not afford to get wrong, and read it back twice. Then she said in a voice gone young again for just a moment, Shopkeeper, is there truly no vigil left? Nothing? They kept the stud on every hull. They made the plates out of brass so they'd outlive the ships. Somebody kept paying for the address. The registry doesn't keep dead addresses alive for free. Someone pays the license. I looked it up once in training, I thought. She stopped herself. I thought the number went somewhere. It went somewhere, Tosk said. It went to a man who sells rope. And then he stood for a moment in his own closed shop, in the smell of oil and meal and cold brass, and looked down the dark arcade through his shutters, at the one lit window across the way, and at his own shelves, third aisle, top rack. 6 crates with off-world routing stamps, and a manufacturer's seal he had always liked for its bluntness, a human firm, Castor and Vale, who made field transceivers for prospectors and ice haulers and anyone else who worked beyond the edge of sense. He stocked them because the dock gangs swore by them. Drop one off a gantry and it apologized for the dent, and riveted to the lid of every case. He had read it 100 times while doing inventory. The way you read a thing that means nothing to you. A small steel plate, stamped in the human trade script and in 3 local scripts beneath. This set keeps the Terran common watch. Channel 1 is always manned. If you are in distress and all else has failed, key twice and speak. You do not need to be human. He had always assumed it was advertising. Rin Setha, he said into the handset. Stay on the line. I am going to open some stock. The crate came off the rack heavier than he remembered. He cracked the seals with a pry bar from aisle 1, lifted out the transceiver, a gray-green slab the size of a bread loaf, with a fold-out antenna and 2 fat knobs and a single recessed key the color of a wound, and set it on the counter beside the hissing handset. The cell that shipped with it showed half charge. Castor and Vale shipped their cells wet, against regulation and to every customer's gratitude. He folded the antenna out. He turned the left knob until the little display woke and said, in plain trade glyphs, Channel 1, Common Watch. He looked at it for 2 full seconds, a grocer at the end of his inventory, 51 years old, standing in a closed shop between a dying ship and a species he had spoken to perhaps a dozen times in his life, mostly about Greece. Then he keyed twice and spoke. This is the shop, long shelf provisions, Celis Ring, Hadri Civil Habitat, Dock Arcade. I am not human. I am not in distress. But I am holding the hand of someone who is, and her chain of command is going to verify her to death. The plate on your crate says Channel 1 is always manned. Prove it. The reply took 4 seconds, trunk lag, he would learn later, the words threading down the registry spine, finding a human relay buoy at the corridor mouth, and falling the rest of the way to a watch floor whose location he would not learn for months. 4 seconds. Then a woman's voice, level as a countertop, with the particular unhurried flatness he would come to know better than some kin. Long shelf provisions, Terran Common Watch, Controller Reyes. The channel's manned. Go ahead with your someone. Afterward, when people asked Tosk what the humans had said when he told them, and people asked him for years, in his shop at the bathhouse, once at a wedding, he always gave the same answer, and watched the same disbelief cross their faces, because everyone expected the humans to have asked the question the Navy's Q would have asked. They expected verify. What Reyes actually said, when he had laid it out, the ferry, the souls, the flare fan, the dead farm, the stud, the cam that pointed at a grocery, was nothing at all for one breath. He heard a pen click, an actual pen. Then, confirm one thing for me, long shelf. The voice on your other handset. Is it live right now? It's live. Then hold it to this set. I want her to hear me, and I want it in her own ears, not relayed. Go ahead when ready. Tosk picked up the shop handset in his right hand and held it speaker to speaker with the transceiver, a thing so crude he was embarrassed to be seen doing it by his own shelves, and said, Rin Setha, there is a human on my counter. She wants to speak to you direct. The 2 devices crackled at each other across 6 centimeters of countertop, across 11 light days of corridor, across a gap between species that had a trade treaty, a custom schedule, and not one shared word for grief. Reyes's voice came up out of the gray-green slab, slow and clear, pitched for a frightened apprentice the way you pitch a voice for a spooked animal. Not softer, just steadier. Sign Karu signals, this is Terran Common Watch Controller Noah Reyes. I have your position, your soul count, your boat state, and your window. I am declaring this a live distress effective 40 seconds ago on my own authority, which is sufficient. Here is what I am not going to do. I am not going to ask you to prove you're dying. A voice is a beacon, you keyed, we heard. That's the whole protocol. Here is what I am going to do, and you can write it down, because everything I say on this channel is recorded, and everything recorded is owed. That pen clicked again. I am turning the nearest hull we have towards you inside the next 5 minutes. I am waking 3 desks that handle what comes after that. And I am not closing this channel until you are off the ship. If I leave this chair, another controller sits down in it while my body's still warm. You will never key this address again and hear nothing. Acknowledge. There was a silence on the Karu's end, and Tosk, holding the 2 machines together with both hands now, realized his arms were shaking very slightly and that it was not fatigue. Acknowledged, Rin Setha said. Acknowledged Common Watch. And then, because she was Sen, and 17 years of plates and catechism do not dissolve in one night. The plate said the vigil always answers. I keyed it knowing the vigil was dead. I want it on your recording that I don't understand why a human desk answers a Sen plate. Because we read your plate, Reyes said, and we thought it was the best law we'd ever seen written by anybody, so we stole it. File a grievance. Papers moved. Sayan Kuru, stand by. Long Shelf, take your handset back. You and I need to talk about geometry. The geometry, Reyes explained, was the knight's real enemy, and it had two heads. The first head was distance. The Common Watch was a listening organization with teeth it could call on, not a fleet standing in rows. Its assets were wherever working humans happened to be. The nearest human hull to the Marin Deep Corridor was a heavy fuel tanker named Persistent, 11 days out of the Hadri fuel yards. Running full and full, for a tanker, meant she was currently the single largest concentration of mass moving in the corridor short of the rocks themselves. At her best continuous burn, throwing away schedule, bond, and a measurable fraction of her cargo as reaction margin, Persistent could be alongside the Saiyan Karu in roughly 14 hours. That left 13 hours of margin before the flare crossing. Margin like that looks fat, Reyes said, until you try to move 1,000 people through it in 260-seat sips. Then it looks like a knife edge. The second head was the one that lived in Tosk's shop. The Saiyan Karu could transmit to exactly one address in the universe, his. Every word from the ferry, every count, every casualty, every coarse refinement off her drifting hull, every question asked by every desk Reyes was waking, would arrive at a grocery counter on Celis Ring, and nowhere else, and would have to be carried from his right hand to his left. The Common Watch could hear the Karu only through Tosk. The Karu could hear the Common Watch only through Tosk. We can reroute trunks, and we will, Reyes said. We can put a software bridge on your shop line by morning, with your permission and your registries, and I have a colleague composing a message to your registry right now that they are going to frame and hate. But the bridge carries the words, not the weight. Someone on your end still owns that handset. The Sen girl broke glass to reach a voice, Long Shelf, not a switchboard. Right now, the voice is you. I need to know if you understand what I'm asking before I build tonight's whole architecture on a man I've never met who sells rope. Tosk looked around his shop. The shutters were down. The night lamps threw long amber stripes across aisle 3, across the crates from a human factory, across 23 years of a number that had never been his to buy. On the counter, the shop handset hissed with the carrier of 1,083 people, and he could hear faintly that somewhere in that echoing space someone had begun to sing. One voice, then a dozen, one of the Sen observance rounds, the kind they sang on ferries at lamplighting, because it was the hour for it and terror does not excuse the hour. I own the handset, Tosk said. Build your architecture. Then here's your first load-bearing wall. Say your name for my recording, your whole name, not your shop's. A vendor Tosk. The Common Watch designates your station Vigil Relay 1, effective now. It's a real designation. It goes in real traffic. Lawyers will see it. From this moment until the last soul is off the Saiyan Karu, your counter is a rescue coordination node, and everything you relay carries the Watch's authority behind it. That's not a courtesy. It's load-bearing too. When you speak to that ship, you are not a grocer guessing. You're the Watch. We'll be right behind every word, but the words will be yours, in your voice, in their language, because trunk lag is 4 seconds and machine translation is for cargo manifests. Last thing, is your cell charged? Half. Fix that before anything else. The number of rescues lost to dead batteries would empty your shelves of mourning cloth. Reyes out, keying you the tanker now. What came next, Tosk would later fail to describe to the satisfaction of any Hadri who had not been there, because the Hadri word for what came next was procedure, and procedure was a gray word, and there was nothing gray about hearing a species lean its whole weight onto a stranger's wrong number. The transceiver clicked, retuned itself with a small decisive sound like a lock going over, and a new voice came up, male, rougher, with engine room in it. Long Shelf, Vigil Relay 1, whatever your name is tonight, this is Persistent, Master speaking, name's Okafor. Common Watch, flash me your ferry. Confirm souls 1083. Confirm, Tosk said, 1083. 206 of them children. The shrine season. There was a pause with arithmetic in it. We're a tanker, Vigil 1. Crew of 19. Beds for 30. Galley rated 40 if nobody minds standing. You understand what I'm saying? Alongside in 14 hours isn't the problem. Alongside with somewhere to put a congregation is the problem, and I've got one idea, and my chief mate is already screaming about it, which is how I know it's good. Ask your ferry, what's their hull pressure rating on the boat's docking collars? And does anybody aboard know how to scrub a tank? Scrub. Tosk stopped. Say the idea, Persistent. We're running full of refined drive slurry and 4 cargo tanks the size of your habitats. Bathhouse. Tank 2 and Tank 4 are due for reline anyway, certificates in my desk. We burn the cargo out of 2 and 4 as reaction mass on the way to you. That's our fuel for the hard burn. The cargo pays for its own funeral. Then we purge, flush, scrub, and reline them in flight with the habitability kits every tanker's carried since. The series convention. It's done in yards in 5 days. We're going to do it in space in 12 hours. When we come alongside, those 2 tanks are holds. Heated, lit, aired, ugly as sin and smelling like a refinery's regrets. Rated for 800 bodies between them if the bodies are friendly. Your ferry's boats shuttle people across. We pack them in the tanks. The flare can do what it likes. Nobody rides outside, that's the idea. Tell your apprentice, Tosk told his apprentice. He held the handset and said the words in good slow trade, Sen, and heard her repeat them to the second mate. And heard, this he would also fail to describe. The noise that moved through the crowd behind her as the words went out among the pilgrims in their own tongue, passed mouth to mouth down the companionways, changing pitch as it went, disbelief into something with heat in it. They are emptying their ship for us. The humans are pouring out their cargo to make room. Second mate asks, Rin came back. What the cargo's worth? The slurry. Okafor's laugh down the channel was brief and entirely without bitterness. Tell him if he asks that again, I'll bill him. Persistence turning now. You'll feel us before you see us. We make an honest wake, 14 hours. Keep your boats warm and your people fed, and somebody find me their docking collar numbers. Okafor out. And then for a moment the shop was almost quiet. 2 carriers hissing, the cold store humming, the night arcade empty beyond the shutters. And Tosk put his head in his hands for exactly 5 seconds, which he reckoned he had earned, and then took it out of them again because the transceiver was clicking and a third human voice was introducing itself, and this one had the dry, unhurried delivery of a man reading from a very old book he personally found hilarious. Vigil Relay 1, good evening, or whatever you keep locally. My name is Quill. I administer the open charter desk. You won't enjoy our conversation, and it is going to save more lives than the tanker. Are you ready to copy? Copy to whom? I'm a relay, Mr. Quill, not a fleet. You're a relay with the only live link to the casualty, which makes you, under Article 9 of the Open Charter, the designated scene authority's voice. Don't argue. The lawyers lost that argument in a worse century than this one. Here is what the Open Charter is, because your registry's briefing pack will get it wrong. It is a standing offer posted on every human band, in force for 60 years, any civilian hull, any flag, any species that diverts to a declared distress at the watch's request is paid full scale for cargo, schedule, fuel and wear, plus indemnity, plus crew bonus, out of a fund that has never once failed to pay. We do not requisition. We do not commandeer. We buy at honest prices in advance, sight unseen. It turns out that if you make rescue the best paying cargo on the board, you do not need a fleet standing in rows. The corridor is your fleet. The market is your admiral. I find it distasteful too, and it works. Paper rustled, actual paper. At declaration plus 40 minutes, that's now. I show 22 hulls inside useful range of your ferry's track. I am about to key all of them. Some are human, most are not. Every one of them is going to call your shop inside the hour to ask if the distress is real, because they know the watch's voice can be spoofed, but nobody's ever successfully spoofed a frightened grocer. Answer them plainly. What they're deciding in that call is whether to throw away a season's profit on your say-so. Lie to no one, polish nothing, and we'll have a flotilla by dawn. Quill out, he was not wrong about the hour. The calls began before Tosk had finished wiring the transceiver's cell to the shop's chiller circuit. A butchery of a job he did with aisle 2, parts, kneeling behind the counter with a stripping knife while the handset balanced on his shoulder, and they came in every accent the corridor owned. A Hadrior shuttle master who knew his shop, who'd bought rope from him for a decade, and who said only, Tosk, is it true? And hearing yes, then I'm burning, put me on your list. A Sen grain hauler, the master so old her voice whistled, who made him read the ferry's name twice and then said something in Temple Sen he had to. Ask Rin to translate later. It is answered to the 5th generation, which Rin could not say aloud the first time without stopping in the middle. A human ice tug with a crew of 4. A Vesk slag barge that could offer nothing but water tankage and offered it anyway. A liner, an actual liner. Sen flag, 1100 berths, the pride of all Vass, whose master called not through the watch but straight down the public trunk to the shop, bypassing his own company's traffic office, and said, I carry pilgrims to the same shrine. I am 2 days beyond the window, and I am coming anyway, because somebody will need beds or a funeral hall, and we are equipped for either. Tell the Karu the pride is behind them. By the 3rd hour of it, Tosk had stopped writing names on invoices and started writing them on the shop's order ledger in the column ruled for goods received, because the ledger was the most serious paper he owned, and the night had earned it. 22 hulls keyed. 19 answered. 17 turned. He read the list to Rinsetha entry by entry as it grew, because Reyes had told him quietly, controller to relay in one of the gaps, that the list was medicine. People die of arithmetic before they die of flares, Reyes said. She's been alone with the numbers for half a night. Change her numbers. The numbers changed her. He heard it happen. Somewhere between the grain hauler and the liner, the apprentice's voice shifted registers. Not lighter but wider, the voice of someone who has stopped guarding a door alone. She began to pass him things unasked, refined drift figures off the second mate's plot, the infirmary's count, the names of the 6 fused boats, the fact that the shipmaster had woken, asked whether the stud had been keyed, been told yes, been told who answered, and had laughed once carefully around his cracked skull and said, then the plate was true after all. It just took the long way. She passed him smaller things too, in the dead intervals while desks did their work, that she had been born on Alvas under the shrine itself, that she had taken the signal's berth because she got sick in small boats, which she now found very funny, that the heritage set she was nursing had a brass works and a wooden case wood and a hand-cut maker's mark from a sen yard that had closed before the vigil had. I'm keeping a log on real paper, she said. If we live, it goes to the shrine archive. You're in it, shopkeeper. I spelled your name from sound. Fix it for me. He spelled it. She read it back. It was absurdly, the moment his eyes stung that night, not the souls, not the flotilla, the spelling. Warden Olney called back at the 4th hour. Her voice had the scrape-flat quality of a person who has spent 3 hours being told no by increasingly senior people, and then 1 minute being told something else. Task, 2 items in the order I learned them. Item 1. The Naval Q opened its verification file on the Sayankaru. The file is, I am quoting a deputy Q master, may his shoes always pinch, progressing on the standard track with crimson annotation. Translated. They believe it, they grieve it, and the launch authority is chained to a verification instrument your ferry cannot operate, and nobody between him and the Admiralty will eat the career that breaking the chain costs. There will be 3 Sen naval hulls underway the moment the file closes, and the file will close roughly 9 hours after everyone's dead. Item 2. She paused, and he heard her decide to just say it. Item 2 is that the Sen Naval Attaché on Celis Ring was woken an hour ago by his own knight. Clerk, because the clerk's family runs freight, and the clerk's family's freight band is on fire with the news that a human tanker is burning its own cargo for fuel to reach a Sen ferry with 17 civilian hulls behind it on the strength of 1 voice and a grocery line. The attaché has been listening at the trunk for an hour. He called me to ask 1 question, not whether it's real. He asked whether the watch had requested Sen naval assistance through any formal instrument, because if they had, he could refuse no formally instrumented request. There's a treaty, and the refusal or not would be his to own, not the Q's. Let that sit. Tosk. You are a designated scene authority's voice under a human charter that 9 sectors recognize. That's a formal instrument. If Vigil Relay 1 requests Sen naval assistance on the recorded channel, by name the attaché owns the answer. Personally, tonight. Tosk looked at the transceiver. Raise, you heard, I heard. A beat. Your call, Vigil 1. It's your government, your nation's pride, your neighborhood. We'll back either answer. He thought of the Q clerks, drowned and not cruel. He thought about pride, his own people's and the Sens and the strange flat pride of the humans who had built a desk that answered everything. He picked up the transceiver's handset and spoke slowly, for the recording, in his shop voice, the one for orders he could not afford to get wrong. This is Avender Tosk, Vigil Relay 1, Scene Authority's voice for the casualty Sayankaru. To the Sen Naval Attaché, Celis Ring Station by name, Attaché Dovich Saru. Sir, 1,083 of your people are falling into a flare fan, and the strangers are already burning. The Vigil's number rang in my shop tonight, because somewhere in 81 years, everyone responsible assumed somebody else was keeping it. Here is your chance to be somebody else. Vigil Relay 1 formally requests Sen naval assistance. The recording has your name in it now, attaché. So does my ledger. Choose which document your grandchildren read. 11 minutes later, 3 Sen naval fast cutters broke their moorings at the Telvar yards without a closed verification file, on an attaché's personal order and his seal, and as it later emerged at the inquiry, his letter of resignation pre-signed and clipped to the order in case it went badly. Reyes logged their burn vectors and said only, "Welcome to the flotilla, gentlemen," and Quill's dry voice could be heard for a moment in the background of the watch floor, observing that the cutters were not technically eligible for charter pay, and that he intended to send them the forms anyway, as a gesture. The night should have crested there. It did not, because at the 5th hour the Sayankaru began to tumble. It came on slowly, a slurring at the edges of Rin's carrier, a station that had been clean going gritty, and then it came on fast. The strike that had killed the drive room had also nicked an attitude ring, and the wound had been creeping all night, venting a whisper of stored gas along a fracture, and this whisper had patiently bought itself a slow end-over-end roll that the dead mains could not correct. The Heritage set's point-cast horn was fixed to the hull. As the hull rolled, the horn swept its narrow cone across the registry trunk's pickup like a lighthouse beam sweeping a coast. Contact, fade gone, silence, contact, fade gone. The cycle was 11 minutes long. The contact window was 90 seconds of it. Vigil 1, watch ray as flat as ever but faster. Tell her on the next window, we know, we see it, it's the roll, it's not her set. Persistent is 9 hours out. The cutters are 12. We can live with 90 seconds and 11 minutes for coordination, it's ugly. But rescue ran on worse for centuries. What we cannot do is thread the boat transfer choreography through it at the far end. When there are 200 people in suits, on a line between two hulls, 90 seconds an hour of voice is how you get a count that ends in approximately. I will not run an approximately operation. We need her signal held steady and her horn is riveted to a rolling ship. So we don't fix her end. A breath. We fix yours, your habitat's end, Vigil 1. The trunk pickup that her beam sweeps past. That's registry hardware at the corridor mouth. But the trunk's last hop to your shop runs through Celis Ring's own mast farm. If your habitat can widen its ear, more aperture, more gain, a bigger catch, we can hold her through most of the roll instead of a sliver of it. That's not watch hardware and not watch jurisdiction. That's yours. Who do you know, shopkeeper? Who owns antennas and owes you favors? Tosk looked at his dark shop, and through the shutters at the arcade, where, he now registered for the first time, lights had been coming on for an hour. Word travels in a habitat the way heat travels in a pan. The baker across the way, Audie Frell, was standing in his own doorway in his flower apron, not pretending otherwise, openly watching the grocery that had become the most important room in 9 sectors. Behind him in the arcade stood 2 dock riggers, a customs runner, and a woman from the temple registry still holding her night candle. Everyone, Tosk said. I know everyone. I sell rope. What Celis Ring built between the 5th hour and the 9th was never given a name in any official document, because no official document had a category for it. The registry's after-action file called it an unsanctioned aperture extension of the civil mast farm, which was a clerk's way of describing this. 41 dock riggers, 6-yard electricians, the entire night shift of the Frell bakery, a customs runner with master keys she was definitely not supposed to use for this, and the chief of the Spinward Gantry gang, a slab-shouldered hadri named Vasht who had once broken a knuckle on Tosk's counter arguing about wire gauges, swarming the ring's old mooring gantry in suits and stringing it with every meter of conductive cable, every amplifier module, every match coupler and weatherhead in long-shelf provisions stock, aisle 2, aisle 5, and the good crate under the counter that Tosk had been saving for a customer who could afford it. The mooring gantry had not held a ship in 40 years. It was a skeleton the ring kept for inertia's sake, a kilometer of honest girder pointing at the sky. By the 7th hour, it was the largest improvised listening structure in the corridor's recorded history, lashed into the trunk's last hop through a junction box that Vasht's people had rebuilt around the registry's seals rather than through them. On the theory correct, it turned out that seals witnessed are seals respected, and the registry inspector standing at the box's open door with her candle had been at the temple registry desk 4 hours earlier and showed no inclination to write anyone up for anything ever again. Tosk missed most of the build. He heard it secondhand, through his shutters and down the freight band, because he was behind his counter doing the thing the night had appointed him to do. Holding. Every 11 minutes, the Karu's beam swept past and the carrier rose out of the grit, and for 90 seconds he passed traffic both ways at the pace of a man dealing cards. Persistence burned figures right hand to left, the infirmary count left hand to right, the cutter's vectors, the boat collar pressures, Quill's flotilla assignments, each item read back, each readback logged. In the gaps, he wrote, the order ledger had become the operation's spine without anyone deciding it should. Hull names in the goods received column, soul counts in the quantities column, and in the wide column meant for supplier remarks. The night's narrative in block glyphs, time-stamped, because 30 years stock-taking had taught him that the difference between a story and a record is the timestamp. At the 8th hour, the gantry array came alive and the 11-minute lighthouse became a steady lamp. The grit fell out of Rinsetha's carrier mid-sentence. She was reading the infirmary list at the time, and the sudden clarity was so total that she stopped, and he heard her breathe, and the breath had a room's worth of space around it, where for hours there had been only noise. Vigil Station, she said. I can hear you like you're aboard. You're holding steady on my board. Whole signal. The ring built you an ear, Rinsetha. A kilometer long. He had meant it as a report. It landed as something else. He heard the handset change hands, heard the second mate's voice, formal, in trade sen. Confirm for my log the civil habitat at Celis Ring has dedicated a mooring gantry to this ship's voice. Confirmed, Tosk said, and there was a pause, and the second mate said, with great care, noted for the record, in the exact tone of a man saying something else entirely. Reyes came up on the heels of it, Vigil 1 watch. With continuous carrier I can hang a software bridge on your line now. Watch traffic direct to the Karus set. No relay lag. Standing offer. Want it? Tosk's thumb found the transmit key and rested there. Across 6 hours he had carried every word of this in his 2 hands, and his back hurt, and his voice was fraying at the edges, and the offer was a chair held out to a man who had been standing all night. What does she lose? He asked. A pause that was almost a smile. Nothing. The bridge is a parallel path. Your handset stays live. What she loses is needing you. What she keeps is having you. Hang your bridge, Tosk said. I'm keeping the handset. Vigil 1. Watch. We never doubted it. The bridge took the freight of it. The vectors, the figures, the desk traffic. And what stayed on the handset was the part the architecture had. Been built to carry and could not. A voice that had answered, talking to a voice that had called. She told him about the Pilgrims' lamp service held in the boat bay because the chapel was open to space. He told her about the gantry, the bakery, the candle. She read him names off her paper log so that they would exist in 2 places. And at the 9th hour she told him, in the flat tone she had learned that night from a human controller, that the second mate's plot and the watch's plot now agreed, and the agreement was bad. Mosh's ember was running ahead of its almanac. The flare's leading edge would cross the Karus track not in the original 27 hours but in 22 and change. The window between Persistence arrival and the crossing. The window through which 1,083 people had to move in 260-seat SIPs had just lost 5 hours of its 13. Watch copies, Reyes said on the bridge, already moving. Persistent, you heard. Heard. Okafor's voice had gone quieter across the night, the way working voices do when the margin thins. Quiet in a tanker master is what shouting is in other people. We're at limit burn now. I can buy maybe 40 more minutes squeezing the margin reserve, and I'll do it, but the honest arithmetic doesn't close from my end alone. Run it, watch. 5 boats cycling, average load 52, transit and dock cycle 90 minutes if their coxswains are good and nothing snags. That's 260 souls every 90 minutes against an 8-hour window with suiting time off the top. He let the channel carry the silence while everyone did the division and got the same wrong answer. We're short, people. On current numbers, we move maybe 800 and the flare takes the rest in line of sight of safety. I need either more window, more boats, or more docks. Pick one, somebody. It was the worst hour of the night, the 9th, and Tosk would remember it not for the arithmetic, but for what the arithmetic did to the people inside it. The second mate proposing, in a voice like a man laying his own hand on a chopping block, a priority order, children, then injured, then eldest, and Rin transmitting it level because leveling it was her work now. Quill's desk rerunning the flotilla's geometry and reporting, with audible anger at his own numbers, that not one chartered hull could reach the scene before the crossing. The charter fleet was a wall behind the casualty, magnificent and 5 hours too far back. The Sen cutters at maximum burn, their commander breaking calm discipline to say in Temple Sen a sentence the translators on 3 worlds rendered 3 different ways and every version meant hold. And in Tosk's shop, the baker Adi Frel setting a tray of morning loaves on the counter without one word because it was that hour, and a man who could do nothing else could still do the thing he did. It was Vasht, of all people, gantry chief, breaker of knuckles, who unjammed the night. He had been sitting on a coil of his own surplus cable by the cold store, listening with the dock gang, uninvited and unbudging, and at the bottom of the worst hour he stood up and said, loudly enough for the handset to take it, "Ask the tanker what's wrong with her manifold deck." Tosk looked at him. "What?" "I rig fuel transfers for a living, shopkeeper. A tanker that size loads through a manifold deck, a row of hard standings, where feeder lighters dock 4-6 abreast and pump in parallel. Persistent didn't fill those 4 bathhouse tanks of hers through one valve like a teapot. Ask her master." Vash was already walking toward the counter, and the night parted to let him. "Ask her master why his boats have to use the personnel collars at all. The boats are rated vacuum tight. His manifold standings take a lighter's hull profile, and a Sen ferry boat is built on a lighter's keel. Every yard rat in this ring knows it. We service both. He can take boats on the manifold deck. 4 at once, maybe 6. Through cargo hatches size for moving slurry by the bathhouse, straight into the tanks he's already scrubbed. The handset and the transceiver carried it together, and Okafor's reply arrived before Vash had finished sitting back down, and the quiet had gone out of the tanker master's voice entirely. "Watch, Persistent. Who is that and is he for hire? Belay the second." "I heard the first. He's right. Manifold deck takes 4 boat profiles abreast. 6 if my chief mate signs off 2 of the emergency standings, and he's standing here nodding, which for him is hysteria. Boat cycle drops from 90 minutes to, give me a second, to 50 if we dock 4 at once and drop passengers straight, down the cargo trunks into tank 2 and 4. New arithmetic watch. That's not 800 moved. That's everyone with 41 minutes of slack. A sound came down the channel that might have been a fist on a chart table. Amend my last. Persistent requires nothing further except that nobody on that ferry trips on a ladder. We are going to make it disgusting, and we are going to make it all. Confirm, Vigil 1. Tell your apprentice. Tell her the count holds. No priority order. Nobody picks children tonight, Tosh told her. He had passed 9 hours of traffic by then. Vectors and counts in the names of the dead boats. And his voice had held for all of it. And it held for this too, mostly, except that he had to stop once in the middle. And Rinsetha waited for him the way you wait for family. And neither of them ever mentioned it, then or after, except that in the paper log that went to the shrine archive, against the timestamp of the 9th hour, the apprentice wrote in hand-cut send glyphs. The grocer's voice failed him here one time for 6 seconds. Let the archive show it was the only thing that failed all night. His son called it the 10th hour. The shop's second line, Ulme, had long since locked the public trunk away from it, routing the flotilla's traffic and nothing else. Buzzed with an override code Talk had paid for years ago and forgotten, the kin code, the one that walks through any lock, and when he picked it up the voice was Jeru's hauling ore 3 systems away, 11 days out even at a bond-burning sprint and already burning it. Father, the freight band says it's your shop, the whole band. They're saying the vigil number rang at the long shelf and the humans turned the corridor around. They're saying a grocer. Jeru stopped. Started again. I'm 11 days out. I know I'm too late to matter. I'm coming anyway. The Pride of Olvas is posting open berth lists for anyone who wants to carry pilgrims home after, and I'm on it. My hold's clean. I can take 200 with bedrolls. So I'll matter late. That's all. That's the whole call. The pause had 11 years of unsaid things in it. Jeru had wanted the counter once, and Tosk had wanted him to want it, and they had both lost that argument to a freight berth. You're keeping the handset, Jeru said. It wasn't a question. He'd grown up watching his father hold things. I'm keeping the handset, Tosk said. Good, his son said, rough. Good. The Tosk and counter, they're calling you on the band, like it's a firm. Father and the counter partners. He laughed badly. 11 days. Leave something for me to carry. 200 pilgrims with bedrolls, Tosk said. Burn safe, boy. At the 11th hour, the Sane Karu's infirmary lost a man, a drive-room rigger burned in the first strike, who had held to the body's own stubborn schedule and run out of it with help 9 hours away still. He was the night's first death, and he would, though no one could know it yet, remain its only one. And Rinsetha read his name down the handset slowly, twice, and asked Tosk to write it in the ledger, not in the remarks column, but in the goods. Received column with the hull names, because he was a ferryman, and the ferrymen are what answered. Tosk wrote it so. The name was Edrin Voss. The inquiry would later spend a full session on him, establishing past doubt that no earlier launch could have saved him, and his widow would tell the panel that she had not come to count hours, and ask instead why a stranger's shop had her husband's name in its ledger under goods received, and when it was explained to her, she said, then the ledger stays open, and that sentence would cost the Sen Admiralty more reform than any finding in the report. And through it all, hour over hour, persistent grew in the Karu's sky from a wrong-colored star into a shape, and the reports came up the bridge in Okafor's thinning margin quiet. Tank 2 purged, Tank 2 flushed, scrub teams in, 4-hour rotation, chief mate's in there himself with a brush, don't tell him I said so, liner kits going up, lights, heater banks, air cyclers rated for crowds, handhold nets for people who've never flown loose. Tank 4 purged, Tank 4 behind schedule, Tank 4 caught up, nobody slept. Hull paint scorched from the burn. She'll never look respectable again. She looks perfect. And at the 14th hour, with the flare's leading edge, 8 hours and 17 minutes out, the tanker Persistent shut down her torch, swung her scarred broadside parallel to the Pilgrim ferry Cyan Karu at 400 meters separation, opened 6 manifolds standing sized for lighters, and hung there against the killing light of Maushi's ember like a long gray wall between the congregation and the sky. Vigil Relay 1 Persistent, Okafor said, alongside, tell the Cyan Karu the inn is open. The evacuation of the Cyan Karu ran 7 hours and 4 minutes, and Tosk kept the tally of it on the last clean page of the order ledger in only notation he trusted at speed. Stockman strokes, 5 to a gate the way he had counted crates his whole life. Reyes called the increments up the bridge as the boats unloaded. Souls moved, 104. Souls moved, 211, and behind each number was a thing no number carried. People who had boarded a ferry for a shrine festival now sliding down a tanker's cargo trunk in borrowed suits, into a steel cavern that smelled of solvent and burnt schedule, where human crew with paint sticks wrote section numbers on the tank wall, and 19-year-old pumpman's apprentice walked the handhold nets for hours teaching Sen grandmothers the two-hand rule in a language he did not speak. The first pilgrims into Tank 2 were met by Persistence Cook, who had spent the scrub hours doing the other thing tanker cooks know how to do, which is arithmetic with insufficient stores, and the smell that met the congregation as the hatch wheel spun was flatbread. 600 rounds of it denses ballast, baked in relays on a galley rated for 19. A grandmother took one, held it a moment, and broke it in half to share with the man clipped beside her, and the human cook turned away fast, because some things in a face can't be watched politely. Reyes put none of that in the increments. Rin put all of it down the handset, in the gaps, in a voice that had begun to believe. The suits nearly broke it before it began. The Sankara was a ferry, certified to the ferry rules, and the ferry rules, written by committees that had never imagined a hull evacuating across open vacuum to a tanker's manifold deck, required suit. Stowage for crew, watchstanders, and one passenger in 4. 890 suits aboard, most of them sized for adults, for a manifest carrying 206 children, and the first draft of the transfer plan died on that arithmetic in front of everyone. Tosk heard the second mate work the problem aloud down the handset with the flat thoroughness of a man refusing to panic in front of his own voice. Suits shuttled back empty for reuse, which doubled the cycle time and broke the window. Children doubled into adult suits, which the suit manuals forbade in lettering that got larger with every edition. It was Marguerite, the boat deck chief, who cut it dead with the obvious thing nobody trapped inside ferry rules had been able to see. Your boats are rated vacuum tight or they're not rated at all, so stop treating them like open skiffs. Seal them and fly them pressurized. Suits go on the cruise and the door watchers only. The passengers ride in shirt sleeves, strapped and warm the whole crossing. The boat is the suit. There was a silence on the Karu's bridge that Toss could hear think. And then the second mate, carefully, if a boat holes on debris mid-crossing, unsuited passengers are lost. And Okafor, joining flat and immediate from the tanker. And if you break the window cycling suits, everyone aft of the 800th seat is lost, and you'll have done it by the book. We've flown this corridor all night. Debris risk on a 400-meter crossing is a number, mate, and it's a small one, and I'll put my own boats under the same rule to prove it. Fly them sealed. The shipmaster's seal came up from the infirmary one more time. Tosk was given the words to relay, and kept the invoice he scratched them on for the rest of his life. Boats are hulls. Hulls are trusted or beached. Mine are trusted. Fly them sealed. And the plan stood up, and the children of the autumn observance crossed the open deep to the long gray wall in their festival. Clothes, warm, unsuited, pressed to the boat ports to look, while their parents held the straps and practiced believing the arithmetic. Every boat held. The rule the committees wrote afterward, which now governs ferry evacuation on 3 flags, is 1 sentence long and everyone in the corridor knows which knight wrote it. A sound boat is a suit with seats. The boats found their rhythm by the 3rd cycle. It was not a clean rhythm. Nothing about that ship was clean by then, because the Karu's roll, the same patient end over end that had nearly cost them the signal, now tried to cost them the launches. A boat dropping clear of a rolling hull inherits the roll. The coxswains had a time release to the swing, kick clear on the cradle springs at the exact degree, and burn across 400 meters to a tanker holding station with her manifold standings, open like 6 patient hands. The first launch mistimed, kissed clear of the hull with a meter to spare instead of 30, and aged every controller on the channel by a year. Okafor's boat deck chief, a flat-voiced woman the channel knew only as Marguerite, thereafter called the swing aloud for every single launch. 11 hours of degrees and counts in a cadence so steady that the Sen coxswains began repeating it back as a chant, and after the night was over, and the linguists got the recordings, it would turn out that the coxswains, who spoke no human trade tongue, had memorized the calls phonetically, sound for sound, and trusted their boats to the shape of a stranger's voice. The transfer ran 4 boats abreast on the manifold deck, 51 minutes a full cycle at the peak of it. The arithmetic held. The strokes climbed the ledger page gate by gate. Then, at Souls Mode 560, Boat 3 hung. It was the cradle, not the boat, a splinter-bent guide rail finally choosing its moment. Seizing the forward shoe with 54 passengers sealed aboard and the swing window closing. And what happened in the next 11 minutes happened too fast for the handset, and Toss got most of it afterward, assembled from logs. The Karu's bosun and 2 riggers going out on the hull on magsoles into the roll, the bar that would not pry, the second mate refusing twice, with the flare clock audible in his voice, to authorize cutting the shoe with 54 aboard and the boat unsecured. And then a voice on the suit channel, the shipmaster's, who was supposed to be strapped in the infirmary, and was not, who had walked himself to the airlock with his cracked skull, because a master signs the dangerous order or no one does, saying in trade sin, "Cut it on my word, on my seal, and on Marguerite's count." And Marguerite, 400 meters away on a tanker's boat deck, who had been listening to the translation lag with her eyes closed, calling the roll for a hull she'd never stood on, 5 degrees, 4 cut, and the shoe parting, and the boat dropping free into the exact second of stillness at the bottom of the swing. Clean as a festival launch, 54 aboard. The strokes climbed. The shipmaster stayed at the airlock after, against all medical sense, greeting the queue as it filed past him to the boats. The watch's recording of the suit channel, entered into the inquiry record, later quoted in 2 parliaments, has him saying the same 11 words to family after family, the old ferryman's farewell, worn smooth as harbor stone. Walk on, the boat is sound, the water already knows you. It has no business working in translation. There was not a desk on the human watch floor where it did not work. At Sol's Mauve 700, the sky changed. Mashi's Ember did not wait politely for its almanac the way it had not waited politely all night. The protostar's face threw a squall front off its limb, not the flare itself but its outrider, a fist of charged wind running ahead of the killing sheet, and the corridor's forecast desks, human and Sen together now, working one plot with 2 alphabets, moved the crossing up again. Not 5 hours early, 7. The window that had held 41 minutes of slack now held a deficit of 19, and every person on the channel did what professionals do with a number like that, which is say it out loud once and then refuse to say it again. Options, Rhea said. Fast, persistent. Can you cycle 6 standings instead of 4? Chief mate's already signed it. That's 9 minutes back, not 19. Boats, can you overload? The second mate this time, direct on the bridge, his trade tongue gone bare. Boats are rated 52. We have been loading 58 since the squall call. Coxswains chose it. That's 6 more minutes. It is not 19. It was the Sen cutters that closed the gap, and they closed it the way the whole night had run, by someone choosing to own a thing that was not theirs to owe. The 3 fast cutters from Telvar had been burning past their rated continuous thrust for 9 hours, riding their reactors at the line the manual draws in red, and their commander, the one who had broken discipline to say hold, now broke something. Larger. The cutters could not carry 1,000. They could carry between them 290 in cargo slings and crew bunks and corridors, in violation of 11 separate Sen naval regulations which their commander enumerated aloud on the recorded channel in advance, each one followed by the Temple Sen word that the translators had finally agreed meant nonetheless. They came in at the 18th hour like thrown knives, shed velocity in a maneuver that the inquiry's flight analyst replayed 9 times with professional disbelief, and took station on the crew's far side, opening their locks to the boat's short cycle. 2 transfer streams now, both sides of the dying ship. The deficit of 19 minutes became a credit of 11. The strokes climbed faster than Tosk could rule the gates. He had been awake for a day and most of a second one. The arcade outside his shutters had become something between a vigil and a freight operation. Olme had surrendered the approach corridor to the crowd on the condition that it stay back of a chalk line, and the crowd, being a dock crowd, had appointed its own marshals and held the line better than constables would have. Adi Frel's ovens had not stopped. The bakery was feeding the gantry crews in rotation. The temple registry woman's candle had been joined by several hundred others, electric and wax, and one improbable signal flare cupped in a welding mask, and the arcade smelled of bread and hot brass, and through it all the shop's open doorway threw its amber light on the chalk line like a hearth. Inside, Tosk held the handset and made strokes in a ledger. He understood by then, dimly, in the way you understand a thing you have no strength left to feel, that he had become, without moving from his stool, the still point of the largest rescue operation in the corridor's history, that 9 sectors of traffic were bending around a grocery, and that all of it, the tanker and the flotilla and the cutters and the kilometer of listening girder, stood on the fact that a wrong number had been answered by someone too stubborn or too slow or too something to put the receiver down. The inquiry would later ask him to name the quality. He would decline. His species had a word for it, he told them, but it was the same as the word for shopkeeper. At Sol's Mauve 940, with the squall front's first static already fizzing at the edge of the long-range plots, Rinsetha said the thing he had known for an hour, she would say, Vigil station, the set doesn't board a boat. He kept his voice level because she had earned a level voice. Say it plain, Rinsetha. The heritage set is hull-wired. The battery is a fixed installation. The cam is riveted. The horn is part of the spine. It transmits from the same Karoo and nowhere else. When I leave the comm locker, this carrier stops. She paused, and he heard paper turn. She was logging her own sentence as she said it. There's no way to take the line with me. The last boats are called for the crew and the watchstanders. Second mate says my seat is on the second to last boat, which means in a while I'm going to do the thing the plate never thought to make a rule for. I'm going to hang up on the vigil. The shop was very quiet. Out on the bridge, the increments kept climbing in Reyes's level voice, 962, 988, and the two of them let the numbers walk past like respectful strangers. You'll be on the tanker board in 20 minutes, Tosk said. The watch bridge carries you the moment you're aboard. It isn't an ending, it's a transfer. I know the architecture, shopkeeper. I helped build it. A breath, it's not the same line, you know it's not. This line is the one I broke the glass for. This is the one that got answered. Another breath, and then, with the formality the Sen save for oaths and inventories, before I close it. The log will show the vigil number was kept these 23 years at a chandlery on Celis Ring, and that when it rang at last, the keeper answered within 3 tones and stayed. I have written it that way in the shrine copy. 3 tones I counted. It's the truest thing in the whole record. Paper closed. The second to last boat leaves in 2 hours at the turn of the watch. Talk to me till then, not traffic, just talk. Tell me about the shop. So for 2 hours, while a congregation crossed 400 meters of nothing in 58-seat handfuls, while a tanker's tanks filled with the living and a protostar wound up its arm, the keeper of the vigil line leaned on his counter and told a signals apprentice about the shop, about Samhay and the auction and the winter coat, about 4-weight grease versus 6, about his son who hauled ore and was 11 days out and burning anyway, about the smell of the arcade on festival mornings and which shelf the good rope lived on, and what the 5 low notes sounded like when a half-drunk rigger keyed them at closing time, to ask a question that could absolutely have waited. She laughed at that, actually laughed, bright and exhausted, the first time all night, and on the watch floor someone made sure the recording caught it, and it is there still, in the archive, time-stamped, the sound of the night turning survivable. It was in those same 2 hours that the night's other traffic found him. Because a line that is answering, the corridor had learned by then, pulls calls toward it the way a lit window pulls travelers, and the shop's second handset, supposedly locked down to flotilla business, kept producing voices that were flotilla business only if you understood the night the way the night had come to understand itself. The first was a woman on Olvas, shrine-side, patched through by the temple registry across channels that had no business connecting. The mother of a pilgrim, one of the 206 children, who had been standing with 400 other families in the shrine forecourt since the news broke planet-side, where the priests had opened the great doors out of season and nobody had gone in, because the crowd would not leave the calm mass shadow. She did not ask for reassurance, and Tosk understood at once that he was dealing with a freight family. She asked for the manifest procedure. Who held the count? How names were confirmed at each transfer? Whether the count was read back? When he told her the count had been read back at every stage since the second hour, by a signals apprentice on a brass set and a grocer in a ledger and a human controller with a pen, all 3 records ruled and time-stamped, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Then I will tell the forecourt the count is kept properly, and we will stop being afraid of the procedure and only be afraid of the sky. That is a better night than the one we were having." The forecourt thanks the counter. And the registry patch clicked off before he could answer, which was correct, because there was nothing to answer. She had wanted the truth and taken delivery. After her in a queue, the temple registry rationed with an iron hand, came others, never many, never long. The registry allowed each family 30 seconds, and the families, freight stock and shrine stock alike, used the seconds like rations in a lifeboat. A father who asked only that the words "tell her the lamp is lit" be passed to a daughter on the Karu, and Tosk passed them in the next gap, and Rin found the daughter, and the answer that came back down the handset, "Tell him it never went out. I carried it banked." Went back up the patch to Olvas, and the registry woman handling the queue, a professional of 40 years standing, had to hand the desk to her relief for a quarter hour. An old man who did not want anything passed to anybody. He had a grandson aboard, and he only wanted to hear, in a living voice and not from a bulletin, that the tanker was real. "Describe it," he said. "You've seen the plots. Describe the ship that came." And Tosk, who had been relaying vectors all night, found himself describing persistent the way you describe a thing you love. The long gray wall of her, the scorch of the burn she had paid, the 6 standings open like hands, the cook and the flatbread, and the paint sticks numbering the tank walls, and when he finished, the old man said, "Good, that is a ship. In my day, the Navy had ships. Now the grocers do. Tell no one I said it," and rang off, and Tosk ruled a line under nothing in particular and sat for a moment with his hand flat on the ledger. And once, the log shows it at the 19th hour, between the cutter's arrival and the last full boats, the second line carried a call that began, With a silence so long Tosk nearly cleared it, and then said, in the over-careful trade hadry of a man reading from notes he had written and rewritten. This is the Deputy Q-Master, Send Naval Rescue Verification Desk. I am not calling in any official capacity. I am calling because my desk's file on the Saiyan Karu is still open on my screen, progressing correctly, and I have spent 11 hours watching a grocery do my job, and I needed to say to the voice doing it that the men and women on my desk are not weak, are not. The notes failed him there. What came instead was the thing under them. We built the chain to keep hoaxers from killing rescue crews, and tonight the chain would have kept the rescue from the dying, and I will be in front of the inquiry inside a season, and what I want you to know before the lawyers teach me to say it correctly is, thank you for being outside the chain. Someone had to be. It should not have had to be a shop. Toss thought about the warden's words at the first hour. The system was built for every other call, and about the Q clerks, drowned and not cruel, and he answered the only way the ledger would have approved. Deputy, when your file closes, send me a copy. I'll keep it next to the page where the chain's 3 cutters arrived 9 hours before your rules allowed, because a man chose to own the answer. The chain has people in it. That's what the inquiry needs to hear from you. Now get off my line. It's for distress. It was the only call all night he ended first, and the Deputy Q-Master quoted the whole exchange to the inquiry under oath, including the part where, as he put it, the scene authority's voice gave the verification desk a direct order, and the verification desk found it actionable without a beacon. The last full boats went across at the 20th hour against a sky that had begun to be wrong. The squall front static was inside the working bands now, frying the edges of every channel except. The forecast desk kept saying it with disbelief. The gantry-boosted trunk path, the grocery line, which the kilometer of girder held clean long after cleaner installations had gone to hash. The watch bridge to the Karu's software was the first to drop. The boat deck channels grew teeth. By the end of it, the architecture that 9 sectors had built across the night was failing in reverse order of improvisation, and the last link standing was the first one. A brass and wood museum piece riveted to a dying ferry, casting 5 low notes worth of carrier at a shop. So the endgame ran on Tosk. The increments came up the handset now, Rin reading the boat deck tallies aloud as runners brought them to the comm locker, Tosk relaying to Reyes on the transceiver, hand to hand, the way the night had begun. 1006 aboard the tanker and cutters. 1031. The shipmaster going across at last carried protesting on the boat with the infirmary cases, and Okafor's voice on the manifold deck saying, Master of the San Karu, welcome aboard. Your ship did right by you. In the tone humans reserve for other people's flags. 1066. The crew streaming aft by sections. The second mate's voice, hoarse to nothing, ordering the watch closed out station by station, and signing the Karu's log for the last time. The entry, later framed in the shrine archive beside Rin's paper journal, reads in full. All souls clear of all decks but the comm locker. The ship goes to the light knowing her voice was heard. There is nothing further for this log. 1,075 souls moved. The second to last boat hung at its collar. 8 seats held, 6 watchstanders, 1 second mate, 1 signal's apprentice. Vigil station, Rin said. It's the turn of the watch. I'm here. I have to dog the locker hatch from outside. The set stays warm till the battery dies. Days, probably. The carrier will just keep going out. 5 notes at the front of every cycle, the way it's done since before either of us. Her voice was doing the thing where steadiness costs. Nobody will ever call this number from this ship again. So I want the last traffic on it to be correct. Don't say anything human. Say the thing you'd say to a rigger at closing time. Tosk leaned on his counter. Through the shutters, the arcade had gone silent, the way only a crowd can. The candles threw their light up the chalk line. Somewhere on a watch floor lights years and species away, a controller with a clicking pen had stopped clicking it. Long shelf provisions, he said. We're closing for the night. Come back tomorrow. We're always open at the proper hours, and the stock is good and the counter is kept. He breathed once. It was kept, Rinsetha. Go to your boat. Confirm, she said, apprentice to the end, requiring the read back, and then in Templesen, in the formula carved under the brass on every old hull, the words she had grown up being taught no one would ever again have cause to say, and which the whole corridor heard her say on a grocery line, Vigil, this is the ferry. The water took your answer. We are walking on.
A click.
A hiss. The carrier held 5 low notes at the head of each cycle, transmitting to its one address an empty room, a warm set, a dogged hatch. She was 4 minutes from the tanker mid-crossing when the flare's true edge came over the forecast horizon, and every plot in the corridor went the color the desks saved for last. What the recordings preserve of the next 51 minutes is mostly silence punctuated by professionals. The squall hash swallowed the boat channels whole. The last 2 boats flew their final approach depth, on Marguerite's memorized cadence and their own eyes. Persistent took the second-to-last boat onto standing 5 at the 20th hour, 53rd minute, confirmed by deck log, not by voice, because there was no voice by then. The manifold cameras show the boat shoes touching down through a blizzard of static snow, and the deck crew hauling the dogs over by hand, and 8 suited figures dropping down the cargo trunk into Tank 4 as the hatch swung. It shows the last boat, the second mate, had ordered himself onto the true last 6 souls, the final sweep team, still 90 seconds out when Okafor made the decision the inquiry spent its longest session on, and held position with every standing open broadside to a rising flare 62 seconds past his own abort line. The boat touched standing 2 with the leading sheet 11 minutes out. The deck crew did not secure it. They dragged the 6 bodies, living all, out through the boat's dorsal hatch by main strength, abandoned the boat on the standing, and Persistent lit her torch with her manifold doors still cycling shut, pulling away from the Sankaru's shadow at a thrust load the tank's new passengers would describe for the rest of their lives. None of which Tosk could see, hear, or learn, because at the 20th hour and 41st minute, the squall had finally found the gantry's limit, and the grocery line went to pure noise, and the shop that had heard everything all night heard, for 51 minutes, nothing at all. He kept the handset to his ear anyway. Of course he did. The arcade watched him through the open door, several hundred people and not one sound, the candles burning down, the baker standing in his apron with a tray he had forgotten he was holding. And Tosk sat on his stool with a dead line to his ear, because the line was his, because the plate said what it said, because somewhere in the static 1982 living people and 1 tanker and 3 cutters were either ahead of a sheet of stellar, fire or under it, and the difference would arrive on his counter or nowhere. He ruled the final gate in the ledger, made it ready, and did not fill it in. 51 minutes. He was 51 years old. He had time later to find that symmetry overwrought and to keep it to himself forever. At the 21st hour and 32nd minute, the transceiver, not the handset. The gray-green human slab, channel 1, the band the squall could not quite kill at the last because the watch had spent 51 minutes rerouting it through 4 sectors and a weather buoy clicked, cleared its throat of static, and produced, level as a countertop, slightly frayed at one edge if you knew it well enough by then to hear, Vigil really won, Terran Common Watch. Persistent reports clear of the flare envelope with all embarked. Cutters report clear, all embarked. Stand by for the count. That pen, clicking once. Souls recovered, 1982 of 1983. The one is Edrin Voss, ferryman, deceased aboard prior to rescue, logged with the hulls at the keeper's request. A pause and the watch floor was audible behind her, and the watch floor was not silent, and she let it not be. All souls, Vigil 1. Say again for your arcade, all souls. The recordings from Celis Ring's arcade at that moment were played, in the years after, at festivals, at the Inquiry, in 2 parliaments, at a shrine on Olvas, and in a shop exactly once on an anniversary with the shutters down. Tosk's own voice is not on them. He had set the handset down on the counter, gently, face up the way you set down a sleeping thing, and walked to his doorway, and stood under the lintel where 30 years of mornings had found him, and the crowd saw his face and needed no relay. The sound they made carried 4 frontages past the chalk line and woke the day shift. The Frel Bakery gave away everything in the cases and started baking again from nothing. The temple registry woman's candle, it was noticed much later, had burned to the socket and gone out at some unrecorded point, and not one person in the arcade, including her, had seen it happen, because no one had been looking at the dark. Behind him on the counter, all through the morning, the shop handset hissed its open line. Somewhere down the carrier, in a dead ferry falling toward the light with her hatches dogged, a warm brass set in a wooden case kept casting its 5 low notes at the only address it knew, and the address it would be recorded did not close and has not closed, and answers to this day. The days after a rescue, Reyes told him once the worst was paid out, or when you learn what you actually built, because the architecture that saves the lives is improvised in a night, but the architecture that gets 1,100 people home, fed, paid for, and accounted is the part that takes a fleet, and that was the part where Earth, having already over-answered a call it was never sent, did the thing Tosk had stopped being surprised by and kept being moved by, which was to keep arriving after arriving was over. Persistent could not carry a congregation for 11 days. Her tanks were shelter, not passage. So the flotilla that had been 5 hours too far back for the rescue became, on Quill's redirection and at full charter scale, the homeward fleet. The Rendezvous, 2 days out from the flare fan, joined the scarred tanker to 17 civilian hulls of 4 flags, and the transfer of pilgrims from the cargo tanks to honest berths ran like a festival procession, boat after boat after boat in the calm beyond the squall's reach. The grain hauler whose old master had whistled Temple Sen took 200 and made her hold a dormitory. The Vesk slag barge fed water to every hull in the line and called it an honor and meant it. The Pride of Olvas arrived last and largest, took the infirmary cases, the elders, and the shipmaster who would recover, and who insisted on being logged aboard as ordinary deck crew ferrymen, no rank. And her master signed for them with a sentence that joined the knight's archive of sentences. Pilgrims received from the deep water, none owing. The fare was paid before my grandmother was born, and 11 days after a kincode had walked through a locked trunk at the second hour of the deep shift, an ore hauler with a clean hold and 200 bedrolls matched orbits with the procession, and Jerutas carried pilgrims home to Olvas, late as promised, mattering as promised with his father's name painted, in small block glyphs that he never told the old man about, and the old man knew within a week anyway beside the hold's inner hatch. Tosk encounter, freight received. The accounting was its own spectacle. Quill's desk paid the charter scale without one contested line, paid the grain hauler and the ice tug and the slag barge, paid persistent for 2 tanks of burned cargo, 1 abandoned boat, 11 separate certifications voided by in-flight tank conversion, and a hull's worth of scorched paint with a rider read aloud by Okafor to his crew, stating that the Open Charter Fund considered this the best price it had paid for anything in 60 years. The 3 Sen cutters were not eligible, being naval. Quill sent the forms anyway, as threatened, each stamped gesture, non-negotiable, and the cutter crews framed them in their wardrooms, and within a year the frames had been joined, throughout the Sen rescue services, by reproductions of the Castor and Vale crate plate, because some jokes are how a doctrine admits it has been outdone. And to Celis Ring's civil administration for 1 mooring gantry's worth of cable, amplifiers, couplers, weatherheads, bakery stores, candle stock, and the complete rescue-relevant inventory of a chandlery on the dock arcade. The watch remitted payment in full against an itemized claim that Warden Olme had assembled from 41 separate chits, every line of it accurate, because the riggers of Celis Ring would sooner have eaten the cable than padded that particular invoice. Tosk reopened the shop on the 3rd day. There was nothing left on the shelves of Aisle 2 and not much of Aisle 5. The ledger's last pages were the corridor's most requested archival document, and none of it mattered to the operating of a chandlery as much as this. The order line rang constantly, and almost none of it was orders, well-wishers, freight masters wanting the story in his own voice. A Sen Naval Procurement Office, mortifyingly, asking whether the long shelf could quote for rope. Children, whole school grades of them, on supervised calls from 3 worlds, asking to hear the 5 low notes. He answered what he could, hired the baker's eldest for the counter, and discovered the truth that the watch had known since before his species had orbit. A line, once known to answer, is never quiet again. On the 5th day, the Sector Comms Registry called an actual registrar, with the careful voice of an institution that has read its own internal review and found its own fingerprints, to inform him that the lapsed address auction of 23 years prior had been ruled procedurally defective in light of the address's heritage status, and that the registry was prepared, with compensation, to reclaim the vigil number for permanent retirement to the Sen Cultural Trust. It had its logic. Sacred things, the registrar said, should not depend on the lifespan of a grocer. Tosk was still composing his reply. Some of it was not going to be polite, when the registrar added, with the sound of a person reading a document that had arrived above her pay grade, that there was, however, a competing filing. The Terran Common Watch had that morning petitioned to underwrite the address's license in perpetuity, in place, unmoved, citing operational precedent, and had attached a memorandum 1 paragraph long over Reyes's signature, which the registrar then read aloud because she had been specifically instructed to, and which entered the corridor's law and lore in the same breath. The instrument under review is a working emergency address, with a verified response history of 1 activation and 182 souls recovered, a record unmatched by any listening installation of any flag in this corridor. The watch does not retire working instruments for being miraculous. The number is not sacred because of what it was. It is sacred because when it rang, somebody answered it within 3 tones and stayed until the water knew them. Leave the line where it lives. We will pay for it forever. It will be the best money we spend. The Sen Cultural Trust, asked to contest, declined in 4 words that were widely reprinted. The humans are correct. The license was settled in perpetuity, joint trust. 3 signatories, the Watch, the Shrine Archive at Olvas, and A. Tosk, Chandler, whose assent was recorded, at his insistence, on the order line itself, in his shop voice in 9 words. The counter is kept. Send the paperwork. We're open. The inquiry took half a year, sat on Celis Ring out of respect for the gantry, and changed more than anyone expected an inquiry to change. It established the timeline past dispute, that the naval verification file on the Sayankaru had closed correctly by its own rules 6 hours after the last soul was recovered, and that by those same rules, every step of the night's actual rescue had been someone exceeding, bypassing, or personally underwriting an authority that was never designed to hear a voice without a beacon. It heard the deputy Q-master defend the verification chain with honest anguish, and heard the widow of Edrin Voss reply with the sentence about the ledger staying open and recessed early that day. It commended, by name and at length, a watch controller, a tanker's master and crew, a boat deck chief, 3 cutter commanders, an attaché whose pre-signed resignation was returned to him framed, a gantry chief, a warden of record, a baker, a signals apprentice, and a chandler. And its findings rebuilt the Sen rescue charter from the keel. Voice distress to be actionable without beacon verification. On the model, the report said this in its first paragraph, in plain glyphs of the Terran Common Watch, whose standing doctrine the panel quoted as a finding of fact. A voice is a beacon. The Sen services named the reform the Setha rule over the strenuous objection of signals officer Rin Setha, who held that it should be named for the plate and was overruled by her own shipmaster, testifying in deck crew's plain dress. The plate told us the vigil always answers. It never told us how to be the vigil. A 19-year-old with a broken directory and a grocer with a thumb on the cradle switch told us how. Name it for what happened. She visited the shop twice during the inquiry's sitting. The first time, the arcade filled and the visit became a procession and neither of them got a sentence finished. She signed the wall by the door under the riveted crate plate from the caster and veil box, which Vashti had pried off and mounted there without asking anyone, where it remains. The second time she came at the second hour of the deep shift, when the shutters were down, and knocked, and Tosk opened the door and put her on the customer's stool and made tea, and they talked until the morning shift the way you can only talk to the other end of your own worst night. About the flatbread grandmother, who wrote to Persistence Cook Monthly, about Marguerite, who had stood for the Coxswain's Guild examination as a foreign candidate and scored the highest mark in the Guild's records on the practical and refused on principle to sit the theory, about the comm locker and the battery in it, which a watch survey drone had confirmed still warm, still casting, the ferry herself having ridden the flare sheet and somehow hatches dogged, kept her spine derelict now on a stable far ellipse, her recovery priced and indefinitely declined because, as the survey report put it, some hulls have earned the long patrol. Before she left, Rin Setha put on the counter the things she had carried across 2 transfers, 11 days of freight passage, and half a year of hearings to put there, her paper log, the original shrine copy be damned, the timestamps, the names, the spelling of his, fixed, the entry about the 6 seconds. Archives keep copies, she said. Originals stay where the thing happened. I learned that from a ledger. Then she keyed the order console's local chime, 5 low notes, grinned like the 19-year-old she had at no point that night been permitted to be, and went to her new posting, which was, of course, signals instructor, first class of the Reform Service, where her opening lecture to every cohort began with a recording of a tired alien voice saying, "This is a shop," and the instruction, "Listen to what he does next. They will tell you the rescue ran on tankers and cutters. The rescue ran on this. Everything else was logistics." The desk went up in the spring. 2 frontages spinward of the long shelf, in what had been a defunct tailor's shop, the Terran Common Watch opened its first staffed listening station on a non-human civil habitat. A small thing, deliberately. 1 watch floor the size of a parlor, 3 rotating controllers, a trunk feed with its own hardened power, and over the door, in the human trade script and in good Hadri and in Templesen, the words Vigil Station 1. The watch had wanted to put it inside the shop. Tosk had refused on commercial grounds. People in distress should not have to wait behind a man buying grease, and on other grounds he declined. To state, which everyone understood anyway, a shop should be a shop. The compromise was a wire. The vigil number still rang the long shelf's counter first, 3 tones. If the counter did not answer, the call rolled 2 doors down to the humans. In 6 months of operation, the rollover had triggered exactly 4 times. Twice while Tosk was in the back lifting stock, once during his niece's wedding, and once, this was the occasion of the only standing order ever posted on Vigil Station 1's wall in a Hadri hand, because a controller fresh from Earth had answered a half-second inside the 3rd tone, and Tosk had walked 2 frontages in his apron to explain, with terrifying courtesy, that the 3rd tone was his. The controllers became his neighbors in the way of small arcades. They bought their bread at Frell's and their cable at the long shelf, and they paid scale without haggling, which the dock gangs found unsporting and the merchants found magnificent. The junior one, a broad, quiet woman named Etta Sloan, who had been a fishing fleet radio operator on an Earth ocean before the watch found her, took to sitting in the shop on her off-rotation. drinking the bitter Hadri countertia and trading the lore of her trade for the lore of his. She taught him the human watchkeeper's superstitions, the ones about never saying a quiet shift out loud and always answering on an odd tone. He taught her which dock gangs rounded their orders up as a tip and which would interrogate a price to the third decimal as a form of affection. It was Sloane who told him one slow evening the thing about Channel 1 that the crate plate did not say, that the Common Watch had been founded by ocean people, fishers and lifeboat crews, the descendants of 1,000 years of small wet boats answering each other in the dark, and that the oldest rule in its book was older than radio itself, and had simply been carried up, unedited, when the species went to space. She recited it for him. The sea does not check your flag before it drowns you. The boat does not check your flag before it comes. That's why the plate worked on us, she said, turning her cup. Your Sen Guild wrote the same rule on brass. Different ocean. We didn't answer because the call was misrouted, Tosk. We answered because misrouted is the only thing a real distress call ever is. Nobody plans to need strangers. He had the sentence lettered small, in trade script, on the edge of the counter facing the stool where she'd said it, and customers who ask about it get the tea and the whole night, which cost them an hour, and there has never been a complaint on the record. Reyes came for the station's opening. Tosk had known she would and had still somehow failed to prepare for it, because for a year the woman had existed for him as a voice on a gray-green slab, level as a countertop, and the voice had become so structural to his understanding of the night that meeting its owner felt like being introduced to a law of nature at a reception. She turned out to be smaller than the voice, older than the voice, with gray at her temples and a dress uniform she wore like an apology, and she came into the shop ahead of the ceremony, alone before the arcade filled, when the shutters were only half up, and stopped 2 paces inside the door and looked for a long moment at the counter, at the stool, at the ledger, open on its stand now under a glass the customers had bought by subscription, at the old gray-green transceiver on its bracket below, kept functional, kept within reach. He watched a controller of 30 years standing perform the same audit he would have performed in her watch floor and arrive at the same finding. So this is where it lives. I owe you an accounting, she said, in lieu of any greeting, because what was a greeting between them? They had skipped that part 14 months ago. Watch rule. After a major operation, the controller closes the loop in person with the scene authority when geometry allows. It's taken a year for geometry to allow so. She took the customer's stool without being asked, which was correct, and set on the counter between them a flat case, and did not open it yet. The accounting. You'll have wondered, you're a stockman, you'll have wondered in numbers, what your night cost us and what we hold it to be worth, because Quill pays the hulls but nobody invoices the desk. Here is the desk ledger. The Common Watch logged 41,000 distress activations last year, quarter-wide, all bands. 38 were major. 1 rewrote doctrine. Yours is the activation we now train on, the one in the first lesson, the one the simulators can't run properly because the simulators model assets, and the asset that carried your night doesn't sim. We tried. The scenario kept failing until somebody hand-coded a parameter the architecture never had a field for, and the engineers, who are young and shameless, named the parameter in the config file where it still sits. It's called keeper. The scenario passes with it set, fails with it null. There are careers being built on papers about what it is. The papers are wrong. I know what it is. I heard it pick up on the third tone. It's a man who didn't hang up, Tosk said. Your engineers can write that in their file. It isn't rarer than they think. It's only never been wired to anything before. That, Reyes said, is what the papers get wrong, yes. They model it as an exception. She opened the case. Inside on the felt lay a pen, the one the whole corridor had heard clicking through the worst hours of the night. An ordinary human service pen with the watch's anchor and wave, stamped small at the cap, its barrel worn to brass at the grip the way only decades do. Watchkeepers carry 1 pen our whole service. It signs our log on our first watch and it signs our log on our last. Mine signed yours, every entry, all 22 hours, declaration to all souls. I have 11 months to my last watch, and I find I already know what the final entry will say, and that the pen has already done the most important writing it's going to do. She turned the case toward him. It doesn't retire with me. It retires here, on the counter where the operation actually ran. The watch's curators wanted it under glass at the academy, and I invoked a rule nobody could find in writing, which is the most senior kind of rule, that the instrument stays with the station of record. This is the station of record of Ender Tosk. It was the station of record before we ever found it for 23 years, the whole time the address was waiting to be needed. We just hung our sign on what your partner bought. She stood, straight in the apologetic uniform. The ceremony will run long, the speeches will be bad, and the attaché is going to cry. He always does now. 2 requests before I go be official. 1. When the children call asking for the 5 low notes, don't ever stop answering those. We monitor that traffic. It's doing more for the next generation of every species in this corridor than the Academy is. She paused at the door, in the place where everyone the night had made now seemed to pause, under the riveted plate from the crate. 2. The T. Sloan reports on. Is it as bad as she says? Worse, Talk said. Sit down, controller. The morning rush can wait its turn behind you. It was the only day in the shop's recorded history that it opened 4 hours late, and the arcade, which knew who was inside, served the morning rush itself off trestle tables in front of the bakery and counted it. Frel said this at the ceremony, in the speech that was supposed to be about the station. The long shelf's finest stretch of customer service to date. Closed, dark, and holding exactly 1 call. Jeru came home that summer for the first time in 3 years, leaning in the doorway at closing time with a freight master's slouch and his mother's eyes, and spent 10 days doing the thing he had sworn at 17 he would never do, which was stand at the counter. He was, it turned out, good at it, better than his father at quoting cable runs, worse at refusing credit, exactly as bad at hanging up on people. On the last evening, over the closing ledger, he said, not looking up, the Pride's master offered me a berth contract. Regular pilgrim runs, Ovas circuit, freight, and families. A line ruled, neat as worship. I told her my family keeps a counter on Celis Ring, and the run terminates here every season or no contract. He initialed the page the way Sammy used to, 1 stroke. She said that was the first time anyone had negotiated a route around a grocery. I told her it wouldn't be the last. It was not the last. Within 2 years, 3-line schedules listed Celis Ring with the routing annotation VS1. A courtesy call, master's discretion, customary, and the arcade's traffic doubled. And Warden Olme, presenting the Habitat's commerce figures to her oversight board, attributed the growth, in an official document, to infrastructure, specifically a reputation for answering. The anniversary, when it came around, was nothing the corridor planned and everything it did. No proclamation survives because none was issued. The thing assembled itself the way the candles had. At the 2nd hour of the deep shift, 1 year to the minute from a wrong number, the order line of the long shelf provisions rang once. A single tone, no carrier, no caller logged, and every comms board on Celis Ring, every hull and dock, every set in the arcade sounded the same single tone in the same second, because half the corridor, it turned out, had quietly arranged to key the vigil's 5 low notes first note once all together and then clear the band, 1 note, then silence, kept open. The watch's traffic analysis later counted the participating transmitters and declined to publish the number, saying only that it exceeded the corridor's registered hull count, which meant people had built sets for the purpose. Tosk was behind his counter when it came. He had reasons to be there at that hour, that night, and he answered the dead air the only way that would have been correct, which was out loud to an empty shop in his shop voice. Long shelf, we're open. And the year went on, and the shop went on, and this is where the story would end, if stories ended where they ought, with the desk 2 doors down, and the plate on the wall, and the log on the counter, and a derelict ferry on her long patrol still casting 5 low notes at a grocery. But lines that answer have a way of being found, and so it is part of the record, the last part, the part Tosk himself put in the ledger, in block glyphs, time-stamped. Because the difference between a story and a record is the timestamp, that 14 months after the night of the Seine, Karu, at the worst hour of a deep shift with the shutters down and the arcade dark and 1 lamp burning over 1 stool, the order line of a closed shop on Celis Ring rang again. He answered inside 3 tones. He was always going to answer inside 3 tones. He had rebuilt his sleep, his stool, and the geography of his back room around the radius of 3 tones. And the watch knew it and had stopped arguing about it. And Sloan had a theory, which she aired only when he was in the back, that the man had not actually slept since the auction 24 years ago, and was sustained entirely by counter T and obligation. Long shelf provisions. The voice on the line was male young, Isen, and pitched at the exact altitude of fear that Tosk ear now measured the way his hands measured rope. Behind it, an alarm with a cracked speaker, and the boom of something venting where nothing should vent. Vigil station. This is the bulk hauler, Tessamy Reach, 4 crew. We have a galley deck fire into the cable runs. Mains are tripping sector by sector. The directory's gone dark, master's at the fire, and he sent me to the bridge, and the only light left on the board. The young voice cracked, steadied itself on procedure the way the drowning steady on driftwood. The only light left was under the glass. So I broke the glass. I pressed the stud. I know about this number. Everyone knows about this number. I know what you did. I'm sorry. I know we're not 1,000 pilgrims. We're 4 freight hands and a fire. I'm sorry, the plate said. Stop apologizing, Tosk said, in his shop voice, and the channel steadied like a launched boat finding the bottom of the swing. His left hand was already moving. It moved without him. 14 months of drills with Sloane's floor had worn the path into the muscle. The transceiver, a newer set now, hard-mounted under the counter, but he had kept the old gray-green slab functional and within reach for reasons that were nobody's business. Woke on its bracket, Channel 1 Live, the wire to Vigil Station 1 already carrying his board to their board, a duplicate trace lighting 2 frontages away where a controller's chair was, audibly, already rolling. Tessimy Reach, you are on the Vigil line, and the Vigil line is exactly where 4 freight hands and a fire belong. The plate doesn't count heads. Now give it to me clean the way you drilled it, position, souls, the fire's appetite, and what's between it and your reactor spaces. The boy gave it clean. Position, the Alvas approach lanes, inside the patrolled corridor, not the deep, not a flare fan, a worked and watched stretch of sky. Souls 4 all accounted, master and engineer at the fire with hand lines, second-hand dragging stores clear. The fire, eating laterally through the cable runs, 2 compartments wide, hungry but slow, and a vented hold between it and anything that could turn a casualty into a headline. Tosk wrote it on the order pad in block glyphs, and even as he wrote it, the night was answering around him, and the answering had a sound now, a sound he could follow like a stockman following his own aisles. Sloane's voice on the watchband, flat and warm at once, declaring the distress live on her own authority, which was sufficient. The Setha rule doing in 11 seconds what the old verification chain had budgeted days for, voice received, voice actionable, launch authority unchained. The Alvas Approach Guard Sen Naval Reformed Charter, a duty squadron that had drilled this handoff with Vigil Station 1 until both sides, could run it asleep, acknowledging with a single word and putting 2 cutters off the pad before the boy on the Tessimy Reach had finished spelling his master's name. The pride of Alvas of all hulls 11 minutes out on her seasonal circuit with a routing annotation that read VS1, breaking in to report her fire and rescue division suited and her master asking, in the tone of a woman collecting on an old joke, whether the grocery would care to place an order. Tessimy Reach, listen to me, Tosk said while the corridor converged. Cutters are 40 minutes out. The liner is 11. Here is what you are going to do with 11 minutes, and you are going to do it in the order I say it, because I have stood exactly where you are standing, except my fire was 22 hours wide and yours is 2 compartments. And he walked a terrified freight apprentice through the 11 minutes the way the night had taught him. Not the firefighting. The master had the firefighting, but the keeping, the count repeated back, the hatches logged, the suit checks called out loud by name so that fear had to stand in line behind procedure, the small talk in the gaps, deliberate as ballast. What's your home port, boy? Who taught you to spell? Tell me about the master who sent you to the bridge. A man who sends his youngest to the radio is a man who knows what the radio is for. By the time the Pride's boats came alongside, the fire was cornered in 1 compartment. The count had been read back 6 times without a stumble, and the apprentice of the Tessimy Reach had stopped apologizing entirely and started, in the intervals, asking Tosk technical questions about cable, because the human watchkeepers were right about this above all things. A voice held is a soul held, and the holding is the whole of the art. The cutters took the fire, the Pride took the crew to a hot meal and a doctor, and returned them by morning, the Tessimy Reach being singed but sound. The whole affair, declaration to stand down, ran 1 hour and 51 minutes and was logged by 3 services as routine, which was, every veteran of the Sankaru's night agreed, the most beautiful word in any of the quarter's languages to find at the bottom of that particular form. Sloane walked over from the station at the end of it and found the shutters half up and the tea already poured, and the 2 of them sat in the opening shop in the deep shift quiet, watchkeeper and counterkeeper, while the morning crews began to move in the arcade. 3 tones, she said into her cup. I clocked you off the trace. 2 and a fraction. Technically, you're getting slow. The fraction was deliberate. A man shouldn't seem eager. She laughed, and then she didn't, and she turned the cup the way she did when a thing wanted saying exactly once. 14 months ago, you told Reyes you were a grocer with a comm console. The record should show. She tipped the cup toward the counter, the ledger, the riveted plate by the door, the wire running 2 frontages spinward, the whole quiet architecture of it. The record should show the description was accurate, and we just didn't understand the job, neither did you. Maybe nobody ever does until it rings. She stood, set the cup in the basin like a guest who knows the house, and stopped in the doorway. Watch question. The one we asked trainees. The night of the Karu, 22 hours, 1,100 souls hanging on a thumb and a cradle switch. At any point, even 1 second, did you want to hang up? Tosk considered it with the seriousness it was owed. Behind his counter, in the light of the lamp that had burned over that stool through all of it, the wrong number, the dying carrier, the gantry, the silence, the count, the year. Through the doorway the arcade was waking, the bakery's first trays, the rigger's first profanity, the temple registry woman passing on her round and raising a hand to him, two frontages of mourning between his door and a watch floor that never closed, wired together at the third tone. Every second, he said. Wanting to hang up isn't the failure, watchkeeper. It's the weight. You hold the line with it, not against it. The day it stops being heavy. He turned the ledger to the morning's clean page, ruled the date, time-stamped it. That's the day you've started answering with something other than yourself. And they can hear the difference on the other end, and that's when calls start dying polite deaths in proper cues. Sloane stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then she nodded once, the way her trade salutes, and walked back to her floor, and entered into the watch's permanent instruction, where it stands today, appendix to the first lesson, attributed in full to A. Tosk, Chandler, Vigil Relay 1, the shortest doctrine in the services book. It is supposed to be heavy. Answer anyway. The shop is still there. The number is still its number. The 5 low notes still ring a counter before they ring a watch floor. By treaty now, 3 signatories, in perpetuity. And Old Sen hulls still carry their brass plates over their glass-covered studs, except that the plates are being recut, fleet by fleet, as the yards cycle the ships through refit. The Sen Cultural Trust agonized for a year over the wording, consulted theologians, linguists, the Shrine Archive, the Watch, and the widow of Edrin Voss, and in the end rejected every drafted grandeur and simply added one line below the old catechism, so that the plates riveted to the bones of the ferries now read, in full, when all else fails, break the glass. The vigil always answers. It may be a shop, answer it back. And on the far ellipse beyond Mausch's ember, falling through her long patrol with her hatch's dog and her log signed, the same Karoo keeps her own watch. A warm brass set in a wooden case, casting 5 low notes at the only address it ever knew, every cycle to this day. The watch monitors the carrier. It is logged formally as the corridor's oldest open call, never to be closed. New controllers at Vigil Station 1 always ask why, and they are always given the same answer, the one Tosk gave the first time he was asked, in his shop voice, with the lamp on and the line live, because nobody hangs up first, not on this number. That's the stock we sell here. We have never once run out.